Hi, my name is Christian Bangle, and today I'll be discussing how retro styles of animation and retro techniques are being used in the modern day to create something new. Out of many types of the media that exist in our world, animation is one of the youngest, and yet when it comes to techniques and genre, it's come incredibly far in the last 100 years. This has led to many animation techniques and genres being phased out incredibly rapidly, whether it be from necessity, innovation, or simply changing with the times. However, in present day, it's not hard to find examples of older animation styles and techniques and genres coming back into popularity. There are movies and shows out there that are using certain techniques for the sake of nostalgia, or because there's a trend of an old genre coming back into style. More often than not, they combine these older styles with something new. We'll go over 3 examples of pieces of animated media that use these older styles and techniques to create their identity. We'll start with an older example.
It's time for Animaniacs.
In 1993, Amblin Entertainment, Steven Spielberg's animation company, released a television series called Animaniacs. The show is regarded as an animation classic and a staple of the 90s, but that isn't what we're here to talk about. At least not completely. One of the many things that made the show unique was its combination of both nostalgia and relevant topics. The show was done in a variety show format and had different sketches that would follow different characters. For example, the 3 main characters, the Warners, were primarily black and white and drawn in a rubber hose animation style, similar to those old cartoons from the 1920s and 30s, the style referring to the round and flexible quality of the characters' limbs. They all also have gloved hands, much like characters of that era. There are even a few episodes that show the Warners in silent cartoons or very thinly veiled parodies of old animations like Betty Boop. A fair amount of the show's comedy was built on the old slapstick of the Merry Melodies and Silly Symphonies cartoons of the 30s through the 50s. Gags like dropping anvils on people, hitting them with giant mallets, gratuitous amounts of dynamite, and my personal favorite, the use of Coyote Time, where a character is already off a building or cliff but has an extra second or two of anticipating before falling. The Warner's gags usually combined all of this with modern humor, though these types of gags weren't their primary focus. There's another segment of the show that's even more dedicated to this idea. The characters of Slappy Squirrel and her nephew Skippy Squirrel are based on the idea of an old retired Looney Tunes character and her mentoring her nephew. She's a former cartoon star now in her 80s, and most of her skits' humor is based around many of the aforementioned gags that usually goes along with the same commentary about how different cartoons or movies are now. There's even an entire recurring sketch that parodies the old and weirdly common cartoon plot of a baby/toddler getting loose and the animal having to chase it. There's even an episode within that bit that references how often this type of skit can be overdone by even having it take place on a construction site where most of these premises tended to end up. The show is simultaneously a love letter to old animation genres and old animation styles, while also making jokes about relevant pop culture in our world, or at least relevant pop culture in the 90s, and sometimes even poking jabs at history and historical figures. It seamlessly blends old and new and doesn't make you question why there's characters that look like they're from the 1930s having a line about Bill Clinton playing the saxophone in their cartoon theme song. Now, let's talk about something a bit more recent. OK KO, Let's Be Heroes is a show that pays homage to things like anime, video games, and old Hanna-Barbera cartoons. It's a love letter to animation and video games, but there are specific techniques that the show utilizes an actual animation process that sets it apart. Like many shows, it's drawn on paper before being scanned and colored digitally, but what sets it apart is that its final line work isn't done in ink, it's done in pencil. The show's creator, Ian J.Q., says that this is done so the audience never forgets that these characters are drawings, but at the same time, it's also a bit of a style homage to early episodes of The Simpsons, as well as games like Yoshi's Island. The show's content is also packed with references to a lot of pop culture from the 80s, such as Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon, as well as old Nintendo and Sega and Sony games. It even references old Hanna-Barbera cartoons having crossovers with things like Scooby-Doo Ghoul School and things outside of that realm of Hanna-Barbera. For example, there was even a weird crossover with Sonic the Hedgehog, which was actually somehow pretty good. And also a crossover with Captain Planet. I don't know how they got away with that, but I am impressed. There's even old televised cartoon references down to the show's outro, with its Cartoon Network and credits scene using the old Hanna-Barbera sound gag clips that they used to use in the 90s. OKKO is a modern-day homage to televised animation of the past. Our last cartoon is the one that is most likely to get me in trouble with a company. We will be talking about Mickey Mouse. Our last example here is from the new Mickey Mouse cartoons that started in 2013. Mickey's new design and new aesthetic are inspired by his original look. The new shorts draw heavy inspiration from Mickey's original design from all the way back in the early 1930s, going as far as to have the eyes with the little chips and pie-shaped kind of deals taken out of them, as well as more rubber hose type limbs, and making him mostly black and white. And he's not the only one to get a design update. Minnie, Donald, Goofy, Daisy, and every other classic Disney toon have got a new design that's a mix between their old 30s Disney style, and if their character wasn't designed in that age, they blend the style of the 30s with how the character looked upon their inception. Even the background and aesthetics look like a spiritual successor to the old Silly Symphonies cartoons. Even from a formula standpoint, the new incarnation of the Mickey cartoons are incredibly similar. Each short follows a set of characters on a wacky cartoon adventure that follow either Mickey and the gang getting themselves in or out of problems that classic antagonists like Pete and Mortimer set up for them. And they can range from simple things like trying to use public transit, to convincing Goofy that Potato Land is a real place and not just a billboard he saw on his way through Idaho. These are fine examples of older animated techniques and tropes being remade for the modern day. The combining of old and modern techniques to create something that manages to be both new yet nostalgic. These properties have demonstrated these principles almost perfectly, using what's old and new to establish a unique identity in the modern mediascape.
Every second that you see is 24 connected pieces. Thank you for coming, thank you for staying, thank you for watching the show.
Out of the many types of media, this has led to many animation techniques. Okay, we'll go over 3 examples of a piece of animated media. A piece. Okay. We'll start with an older example. In 1923. We'll start with an older example. In 1993, Emblem. Okay, we're doing really good today, guys. A fair amount of the show's comedy was built on old sketch slapsticks, some merry melodies, and slightly some fun. There's even an entire recurring sketch about parodies, as there was even a Captain Planet and the new short straw. I'm repeating lines. I burped.